Hello, my name is Brian Dorries, and I'm the Artistic Director of Theater of War Productions, and we're a social impact company that uses live performances, theater, and poetry as a tool for helping communities address pressing public health and social issues. And we're thrilled that you could join us today for our presentation of Poetry for the Pandemic, an evening of readings and dialogue among distinguished poets and young poets of tomorrow, a chorus of diverse voices exploring the transformative power of words. We're delighted to be co-presenting tonight's event with the Alliance for Young Artists and Writers, the amazing nonprofit organization that administers the Scholastic Art and Writing Awards, the longest running, most prestigious recognition program for creative teenagers in the United States. Before getting started, I just want to take a moment to thank the staff of the Alliance for Young Artists and Writers and their National Student Poets program, especially Chris Wisniewski, Hannah Jones, Shannon Costello, and many of the other staff members who will go unnamed for their help producing tonight's event. The National Students Poets Program is the nation's highest honor for young poets grades 10 through 11, creating original work. Annually, 5 students are selected for 1 year of service, each representing a different geographic region of the country. And the program believes in the power of youth voices to create and sustain meaningful change, and supports them in being heard. And that's what tonight's all about. The National Student Poets Program is supported by the Institute of Museum and Library Services, the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, the Wunderkinder Foundation, the Poetry Foundation, and the Academy of American Poets. Finally, in addition to these sponsors and partners, I'd like to thank Theater of War Productions' longstanding supporter, the Stavros Niarchos Foundation, as well as our core partner, the Brooklyn Public Library. And now it's my honor to kick things over to tonight's facilitator, the poet, the professor, the artist, Joshua Bennett, who will be leading tonight's discussion. Dr. Joshua Bennett is the author of The Sobbing School, which won the National Poetry Series selection and a finalist for an NAACP Image Award. He's also the author of Being Property Once Myself, Blackness, and The End of Man, Ode, and Spoken Word, A Cultural History, which is forthcoming from Knopf. He's an assistant professor of English at Dartmouth College, and we're so pleased to have Joshua with us tonight to help guide the discussion with our poets and with the community that's gathered here tonight with us. Over to you, Joshua.
Thank you so much, Brian. Hi, everyone. My name is Joshua Bennett. As Brian mentioned, I'm an assistant professor of English and creative writing at Dartmouth. I'm also, as of 3 weeks ago, the father of a newborn. So if he chimes in at some point, please don't be surprised. I want to welcome all of our poets, performers, comrades, kin, all of our friends and audience members tuning into our event tonight, Poetry for the Pandemic, which I will be facilitating. We have an evening of truly elegant, electrifying poetry ahead. So without taking up too much more time, I'll pass the microphone back to Brian for a bit.
Thank you so much, Joshua. We look forward to hearing from you in just a few minutes. Today's event will unfold in 3 parts. First, a group of actors, distinguished poets, and national student poets will read a selection of poems that they have collectively curated for the present moment, for tonight. Today, we're thrilled to be joined by the actors Tracy Toms and Bill Murray, and by the poets Joshua Bennett, Mahogany L. Browne, former poet laureate Juan Felipe Herrera, Patricia Smith, and Molly McCully Browne, and by the class of 2020 National Student Poets Maddie Dietz, Manasi Garg, Isabella Ramirez, Ethan Wang, and Anthony John Wiles Jr., who will all be performing for their homes spread out across the United States. Tonight's reading, we've asked each of the distinguished poets to select a poem by a national student poet to read, and we asked each of the student poets to select 2 poems by one of the distinguished poets to read or be read by one of the actors. So already in their selections of each other's works, the poets have begun the kind of intergenerational dialogue that we hope to build upon in the discussion that will grow out of the performance. In addition, Bill Murray will be reading a poem by Laura Rothenberg, who was a remarkable poet and author who died in her early 20s in 2003 of cystic fibrosis and left a trove of unpublished poems that explore the deeply interfused relationship between her own respiratory illness and her, as she says, ars poetica, her poetic creation. When the actors and the poets are done with the reading about 40 minutes in, we'll bring a group of 11 alumni from the National Student Poets Program onto the screen with tonight's poets and performers and our facilitator, Joshua Bennett. And then Joshua will kick off the conversation with them by asking a series of framing questions about what we heard tonight and how it resonates with the present moment. And after we've heard from some of the poets and performers on screen, about 20 minutes later, we'll open up the floor to what we hope will be a lively, healing, constructive discussion with you, our audience tonight. During the discussion, Joshua will continue to ask questions and help frame the dialogue to come. And if you would like to respond to one of his questions, we just ask that you use the raise your hand function on Zoom to indicate you have something to say at the bottom of your screen. And for each question, we'll call upon a number of people who raise their hands and promote them to the screen for the duration of the remarks for the time that we have tonight, which is limited. So we won't get to everyone, but that's okay. This is new territory for all of us, a new way of performing, a new way of communicating. So we apologize in advance for the fact that we're not going to get to everybody. And there will likely be glitches and technical issues, and that's okay. Making mistakes and overcoming them is at the center of our model. And our hope is that by making mistakes and being present together and adapting and moving on, we are modeling for you as an audience what we hope you will do during the discussion. We hope that you'll join us by taking the risk of being present and making a mistake and not sounding brilliant or polished in order to be present in the moment with each other and with us, even in isolation, without judgment and with shared vulnerability. This is what makes us human, and it's the only way out of this mess. And so without further ado, I'm going to turn things over to our actors and poets for tonight's presentation of poetry for the pandemic.
Hi, I'm Tracy Toms, and I will be reading The 19th Amendment and My Mama by Mahogany L. Browne. I always took it for granted, the right to vote, she said. And I knew what my mother meant. Her voice constricted tightly by the flu A virus and a 30-year relationship with Newport 100s. I ain't no chain smoker. She attempts to silence my concern. Only a pack a week. That's good, you know. My mother survived a husband she didn't want and an addiction that loved her more than any human needs. I sit to write a poem about the 100-year anniversary of the 19th Amendment. And my first thought returns to the womb and those abortions I did not want at first, but alas. The thirst of an almost anything is a gorge always looking to be until the body is filled with more fibroids than possibilities. On the 19th hour of the 4th day in a new decade, I will wake restless from some nightmare about a bomb and a man with no backbone on a golf course who clicks closed his Motorola phone like an exclamation point against his misogynistic stance. He swings the golf club with each chant, women let me, women like me, women vote until I say they don't. In my nightmare, he is an infective agent. In the clear of day, he's just the same. Every day he breathes is a threat to this country's marrow, for Ida and Susan and Lucretia and Elizabeth Cady. And every day he tweets grief like a cynical cornball comics receipts, like a red light signaling the end of times. The final night of 2019, and my New Year's Eve plans involves anything that will numb the pain of a world breaking its own heart. My mother and I have already spoken, and her lungs are croaking wet. I just want you to know I don't feel well. And I pause to pull up my stockings beneath my crumpled smile. On this day, I sigh. I just wanted to dance and drink and forget about the 61.7% votes. My silk dress falls to my knees with the same swiftness defiant as the white feminist who said, I'm your ally, then voted for the demise of our nation's most ignored, underpaid, imprisoned, and impoverished citizens. Every day there is a telephone near. I miss my mother. In the waiting room of the OBGYN, uptown bound with the dirt orange train seat of the subway. Oh, how my mother loves the places she can never go. Her bones swaddled with arthritis and smoke. So she relies on my daily bemoans. The train smells like yesterday, Mom. They raise the tolls and fix nothing for the people. My landlord refuses to fix my toilet, my bathroom sink, my refrigerator. The city is annoying like an old boyfriend, always buzzing about nothing and in the way of me making it on time to the polls. This woman didn't say thank you when I held the door, and who the hell does she think she is? Each time I crack and cap on the everydayness of my day, my mother laughs as if she can see the flimsy MTA card, the yellow cabs that refuse to stop for her daughter. In these moments, she can live again, a whole-bodied woman with a full mouth to speak it plain. I asked my mother what hurts. What hurts? How can I help from here? 3,000 miles away, alone in a tower between the sea and the Mexico borders. My mother sighs a little sigh and says, nothing. I just wanted to hear your voice.
Beautiful. I am Bill Murray and will read When Poetry Visits, Ars Poetica by Laura Rothenberg. When I cough, poetry leaps with the residue onto my right hand. Poetry rises out of my friend's coffin and dives from my eyes in tears. She dances in the Les Mis music I listen to and streams into my lungs with the oxygen I breathe in. She hides in my medication and ends up in my stomach when I swallow. When I have surgery, poetry is in the operating room until I fall asleep, and in the recovery room to comfort me when I wake up. Poetry spies on nurses, doctors, and friends, and takes on their personas. She lives in needles, my hospital bed, and the X-ray machine, swims on the floors, the IV poles, the windows. She tries hopelessly to find a way to leave, but only comes home with me occasionally. Sometimes I wish I had never met poetry, because I must cough for her to leap onto my right hand.
Hello, my name is Isabella Ramirez, and I'm the National Student Poet for the Southeast region, and I will be reading Let Me Tell You What a Poem Brings by Juan Felipe Herrera. For Charles Fishman. Before you go further, let me tell you what a poem brings. First, you must know the secret. There is no poem to speak of. It is a way to attain a life without boundaries. Yes, it is that easy, a poem. Imagine me telling you this. Instead of going day by day against the razors, well, the judgments, all the TikTok bronze, a leather jacket sizing you up, the fashion mall, for example. From the outside, you think you are being entertained. When you enter, things change. You get caught by surprise. Your mouth goes sour, you get thirsty, your legs grow cold. Standing still in the middle of a storm, a poem, of course, is always open for business too. Except, as you can see, it isn't always exactly business that pulls your spirits into the alarming waters. There you can bathe, you can play, you can even join in on the gossip. The mist, that is, the mist becomes central to your existence.
Hello, this is Juan Felipe Herrera, former Poet Laureate of the United States. Es un gran momento estar con todos ustedes. It's an amazing moment for me to be with these young, great, genius poets, and with Bill Murray, who has a fabulous voice, and to acknowledge those that sponsored and are sponsoring this program. Muchas gracias to everyone. This is all for you, and also for those that are suffering right now with a pandemic, in whatever way we can provide solace and love with our words and poems and heart. This is by Isabella Ramirez, titled Mama. I'm sitting on my mama's bread. My mama's, so we start that over, it's not the bread. I'm sitting on my mama's bed and she's on the brink of breaking down over her homework. I can see the glint of a blinking cursor and the tears glossing over her eyes as her hands search for words in a language all too foreign to her. She said I could count in both Spanish and English by the time I was 18 months old, but it's taken her 21 years and counting to flatten out the unruly kinks of her language. My mama's English is a stubborn wine stain on a white dress. She scrubs at her twisted tongue, desperate to clean the spice, the cilantro, la salsa, that is her accent. Her accent is a tambourine she hides in the back of her mouth. Behind the ivory piano keys that are her teeth, she speaks a merengue, bachata, ranchera, tonada, that she mutes to make room for her English. My mama's English gets told it's pretty good for being an immigrant, to which she replies, "You've got some nerve, you, for being a gringa." Because my mama wasn't a stay-at-home mom. For 15 years to be told that her English needed housekeeping. The beauty of my mama's English is that she doesn't need it to knock your head off your shoulders. Call her a luchador, because she can make you tap out faster than you can say her English isn't good enough. My mama's English is me correcting her at the dinner table. It's me laughing when she can't find the right syllables and sounds, and the words don't fit quite right in her mouth. It's a downturn of her lips at the expense of my smile, because her English is not the punchline of a joke that's gotten too old. My mama's English is a piñata she got me on my 10th birthday, big and bright and pink and purple, but hollow on the inside. It's her count to 3, uno, dos, tres, as she spun me blindfolded, dizzy, and facing the wrong direction. It's the swing and miss of my bat. It's the candy and confetti that falls, and the final hit that breaks it open. It's a game of pin the tail on the donkey. No matter how many times you play, you never get it quite right. It's a quinceañera I never had, overrated and stereotypical, distastefully too Latina. It's a number, birthday candles that melt hot wax onto the cake she's made from scratch. It's the reason my birthday is not just a happy birthday, but a feliz cumpleaños. It's the reason that when I go to my friends' parties, I want to sing happy birthday twice, because mama never let us blow out candles before singing en español. My mama's English is the $1.35 Cuban coffee I drive her to get every Saturday, itching at the back of her throat, bitter and hard to swallow, only sweet from the sugar left in the foam she licks off her top lip. It's the reason she insists the Starbucks double espresso doesn't have the same kick. It's the reason I'm sitting on mama's bed, watching her eyes swell as she fumbles with the keys. It's the reason she got into graduate school at 42, why I help her with her homework before I do my own. It's why the bottom of her computer burns my lap with each Oxford comma and restructured sentence and fixed grammar rule. It's why she doesn't end up crying when I whisper that everything will be okay. My mama's English is the reason I can tell her in 2 ways. She is my everything, mi todo, because her love knows no language.
Thank you, Juan. I will now be reading Exiles by Juan Felipe Herrera. And I heard an unending scream piercing nature from the diary of Edvard Munch, 1892. At the Greyhound bus stations, at airports, at silent wharfs, the bodies exit the crafts. Women, men, children cast out from the new paradise. They are not there in the homeland, in Argentina, not there in Santiago, Chile, never there in Montevideo, Uruguay, and they are not here in America. They are in exile. A slow scream across a yellow bridge, the jaws stretched, widening, the eyes multiplied into blood, orbits torn, whirling, spilling between two slopes. The sea, black, swallowing all prayers, shadeless. Only tall, faceless figures of pain flutter across the bridge. They pace in charred suits. The hands lift, point and ache and fly at sunset as cold, dark birds. They will hover over the dead ones. A family shattered by military, buried by hunger, asleep now with the eyes burning echoes calling Joaquin, Maria, Andrea, Joaquin, Joaquin, Andrea, in exilio. From here, we see them. We, the ones from here, not there or across, only here. Without the bridge, without the arms as blue liquid, quenching the secret thirst of unmarked graves. Without our flesh, journeying refuge or pilgrimage. Not passengers on imaginary ships sailing between reef and sky. We that die here awake on Harrison Street, on Excelsior Avenue, clutching the tenderness of chrome radios, whispering to the saints in supermarkets, motionless in the chasm of playgrounds, searching at 9 a.m. from our third floor cells, bowing mute, shoving the curtains with trembling speckled brown hands. Alone, we look out to the wires, the summer, to the newspaper wound, in knots as matches for tenements. We that look out from our miniature vestibules, peering out from our old clothes, the father's well-sewn plaid shirt pockets, an old woman's oversized wool sweater peering out from the makeshift kitchen. We peer out to the streets, to the parades. We, the ones from here, not there or across, from here, only here. Where is our exile? Who has taken it?
My name is Anthony Wiles. I'm the National Student Poet representing the Northeast region, and I'll be reading a poem by Joshua Bennett titled Mike Browne is a Type of Christ. By which I mean, mostly, that we gaze upon the boy and all of our fallen return to us, their wounds unhealed and howling. I want to say something about indeterminacy here, decomposition as a kind of writing. How a body never vanishes really, merely sketches the landscape anew underground. Foxgloves and marigolds jutting like scimitars from the field's flesh, precious weapons of those thought to be wrought already. Soil song, long gone past the grave. For who says the dead don't think, don't shake? The weight of marrow and slip, quiet as fire, back into whatever partition binds this life to its grand black epilogue. Last night, I imagined every officer's gun, gathered and stuffed in a bomb-proof box by the side of the highway. We wondered what they might choose to craft with their hands, their eyes, both given so long to the work of chasing what can't be contained. I dreamt unkillable multitudes assembled in the wake of a slain friend. The name his mother once cast like a cloak over him, the small and common blade beneath their tongues.
It's beautifully read, Anthony. Thank you. Now I have the honor and pleasure of reading Anthony's incredible poem, which is slowly becoming one of my favorites every time I reread it. We Went Home to Crystal by Anthony Wiles. We ate fried chicken from the Kroger's in Blue Well, collard greens and cornbread on blue paper plates, vanilla pistachio cake and toothache lemonade in the basement of that little wooden church called Pilgrim. This was my first time coming home. The creek was polluted. The mines were abandoned. We were good eating and Lord praising. I was home, I was safe. They knew me and they loved me. I belonged to them. And them mountains, crystal, west by God, Virginia. I knew only in memories long gone and never mine. That Sunday, we went home to Crystal.
Hi, I'm Manasi Garg. I'm the National Student Poet of the West, and today I'll be reading Litany by Mahogany L. Browne. I wish I knew how it would feel to be free. I wish I could break all the chains holding me. Nina Simone. Today, I'm a Black woman in America, and I am singing a melody-ridden lullaby. It sounds like the gentrification of a Brooklyn stoop. The rent raised 3 times my wages. The bodega and laundromat burned down on the corner. The people on the corner. Each lock and key their chromosomes, a note of ash and inquiry on their tongues. Today, I am a Black woman in a hopeless state. I will apply for financial aid and food stamps with the same mouth I spit poems from. I will ask the angels of a creative God to lessen the blows, and I will beg for forgiveness when I curse the rising sun. Today, I am a Black woman in a body of coal. I am always burning, and no one knows my name. I am a nameless fury. I am a blue scratch from the throat of Miss Nina. I am always angry. I am always a bumble hive of hello. I love like this, too loudly. My neighbors think I'm an unforgiving bitter. Sometimes I think my neighbors are right. Most times I think my neighbors are nosy. Today I am a cold country, a storm brewing, a heat wave of a woman wearing red pumps to the funeral of my ex-lovers. Today I am a woman, a brown and Black and brew woman dreaming of freedom. Today, I am a mother, and my country is burning, and I forget how to flee from such a flamboyant backdraft. I'm too in awe of how beautiful I look, on fire. Thank you.
Manasi, thank you so much for that beautiful reading. I'm honored to read your poem it feels like not only it is a reclamation of joy. You're taking up space, specifically in a time where erasure is so easy for marginalized voices and bodies, Black and brown and femme. And this feels like a call to arms. This feels like a welcome home. It's called Conversations at the Table. The feeding of children, that sacred act. My first baptization in a pool full of breast milk. I eat to fill my mother up, find this is the only way to satiate her desire. Find that to be female means an endless yawning, a black hole, the dreaded lost and found, banished to a dark corner, umbilical cord of the unwanted, the grave digger's tango. My body, the homeless shelter, the dip in my hands like 2 hands cupped together, a starved girl begging for spare change found only in 24/7 laundromats and pockets of men collecting in the place between rib and belly, creeping in through trapdoors and side windows, laying waist to the bedroom and shredding the curtains, exulting in woman flesh and scavenging for marrow. My body, the architect's dream, bones undercut by more bones, calcifying tooth to tongue. The hollow in my stomach, gaping like a fish mouth in Chinatown, a reminder of days spent on the scale. Cherry tree barren, men grasping onto branches, parasitical, and my second baptization over in less than 30 seconds, and I understand now. The kitchen table, those sacred grounds, the wood counter, calloused, heady with weight, words unsaid, hewn thickly into the grain, where plates are never empty, and the eating of mother's food, not quite a revolution, more so a birthright. Woman's weaving hands, her stretch marks, soft, fat, made dough only in the hands of the right lover, more so a declaration of hunger. Here, I live to eat. Here, I am fattened on a mother's promise to her daughter. I understand now. To be female means to feast or to be devoured. So we feast. For if my belly is round enough, if my thighs are content with making love to themselves, then there will be no room for the men behind the church and in the pulpit, no room for the dust and the pain, no room for the desperate, no room for the starved. There will only be room for myself. Beautiful. Thank you so much for letting me read your poem.
Thank you so much for letting me read yours. It was amazing.
Wow, I forgot where I was. Totally into that.
Oh, that was amazing.
I am Patricia Smith, and I am here to read Bracken by the Madeline Dietz. In my grandfather's kitchen is a mannequin he bought and dressed in a secondhand tee. He leaves it on the cabin beds and behind shower curtains to scare the wrinkles from everyone's faces. But when I first saw her, I unclenched my fat little fist and wailed a shapeless greeting to her. The water is still some days, and the sky goes deep down within it. Clouds hunt minnows in the murk. I lay on the furry back of one of them, shirt soaked, and open my mouth for God to feed me little chunks of the sun. My tongue is pink because it is burned from glistening oil and fish. I give the mannequin an old dress, sequined, scaled. The new dock leaves splinters in my feet and in my pocketbook, but the latter's already wounded. I give my wife kisses and a wide-brimmed hat. I give my shiny new sons swimming lessons. I have been told that I talk very loudly these days, but the lake doesn't mind. My sons are loud too, and the mannequin is not, for obvious plastic reasons. Everything is louder when the mannequin is cleverly vanished, and when she is found, everyone barks with laughter like a happy pack of feral animals. And Christ, did you know how deeply in love I am with expanse? Medical professionals are of the opinion that my hearing is going. One of my boys is quiet these days, save for when he can't help but yell. We're used to it. He is not. His wife vanished last year in a smokescreen of divorce papers, which was really understandable despite how empty our July dinners feel now. Knowing not how to be a visibly wounded animal, I trap a smaller and more savage creature in my chest to gnaw at my rib cage. My son has the entirety of the local zoo in his own chest. Things are all right at the cabin. My fingers are starry with hot oil burns, and I feed my feral animals with fish once more. Haven't seen the clouds go for a swim in decades, but hey, that's progress for you. That's stern drive engines for you. My wife and my sons play Scrabble with strangers and hand each other bread over the K's and the W's. The mannequin's behind my closet door, and I wail happy, but cannot hear any familiar yips and yelps in return. Dying in one's sleep is surprisingly rare. We as a species have to quit expecting it. There is something sharp in the eyes of a walking, talking zoo, and my wife's body is unconscious on the tile floor beside decades of frying flour worked into the grout. When my son kills me, he does not realize it is me. When my son kills me, he calls 911 himself and tells them not to worry, that the threat has been neutralized. Everything's okay. Medical professionals are of the opinion that if the wounds hadn't gotten me, the adrenaline shock would have. 2 weeks ago, I was walking my sickly cat around the ragged outskirts of a park in my son's old stroller. The mannequin is dressed in sun gold sequins, tucked into my dear child's bed. She gives the cops one hell of a surprise when they pointlessly search the house days later and harass the frightened neighbors and forcibly capture someone I love.
Thank you so much.
You are welcome, Maddie.
Hi, I'm Maddie Dietz. I'm the National Student Poet of the Midwest region, and tonight I have the honor of reading Patricia Smith's 10-year-old shot 3 times, but she's fine, and The President Flies Over. 10-year-old shot 3 times, but she's fine, by Patricia Smith. Dumbfounded in hospital whites, you are picture book itty bit, floundering in bleach and steel. Braids untwirl and corkscrew, you squirm, the crater in your shoulder spews a soft voltage. On a TV screwed into the wall above your head, neon rollicks. A wide-eyed train engine perfectly smokes, warbles a song about forward. Who shot you, baby? I don't know. I was playing. You didn't see anyone. I was playing with my friend Sharon. I was on the swing and she was, are you sure you didn't? No, I ain't seen nobody but Sharon. I heard people yelling though, and each bullet repainted you against the brick. Kicked you a little sideways, made you need air differently. You leaked something that still goldens the boulevard. I ain't seen nobody, I told you. And at A. Lincoln Elementary on Washington Street, or Jefferson Elementary on Madison Street, or Adams Elementary just off the Eisenhower Expressway, we gathered the ingredients, if not the desire, for pathos. An imploded homeroom, your empty seat pulsating with drooped celebrity, the sometime counselor underpaid and elsewhere, a harried teacher struggling toward your full name. Anyway, your grades weren't all that good, no need to coo or encircle anything, no call for anyone to pull their official white fingers through your raveled hair, no reason to introduce the wild notion of loving you, loud and regardless. Oh, and they've finally located your mama, who will soon burst in with her cut-rate cure of stammering Jesus's name. Beneath the bandages, your chest crawls shut. Perky old Thomas winks a bold-faced lie from his clacking track, and your heart monitor hums, a wry tune no one will admit they've already heard. Elsewhere, 23 seconds rumble again and again through Sharon's body. Boom, boom, she says to no one. Thank you.
Wow, that was fantastic. Thanks, Maddie.
Of course. And The President Flies Over by Patricia Smith. Aloft between heaven and them, I babble the landscape. What staunch, vicious trees, what cluttered roads, slow cars. This is my country as it was gifted me, victimless, vast. The soundtrack buzzing the air around my ears continually loops ditties of eagles and oil. I can't choose. Every moment I'm awake, aroused instrumentals channel theme songs, speaking what I cannot. I don't ever have to come down. I can stay hooked to heaven, dictating this blandness. My flyboys memorize flip and soar. They'll never swoop real enough to resurrect that other country. Won't ever get close enough to give name to tonight's dreams darkening the water. I understand that somewhere it has rained.
Miss Maddie. I'm so happy to read with you.
Thank you. This has been an absolute pleasure. I am so happy to be here reading with you.
I will see you later.
See you later. Take care.
I'm Ethan Wang, the National Student Poet for the Southwest region, and I'll be reading What There Is to Give by McCully Browne. Outside of here, my brother lost work in the Chesapeake, and now there is no money coming home. Haven't you heard the news? That there is no longer enough in the world. Not enough oil or milk, money or bread, or labor for those of us with good bodies and sound minds. Given that, would you load what little you have on a boat, stack it with carrots and sardines and silver, then push it, unmanned, onto the river at night? I didn't think so. Sometimes, when we're bringing in a girl, I catch her face before we shut the door, and she looks almost lovely, a useless barge lit up, bearing away on the water.
Thank you so much for that beautiful reading, Ethan. I have the honor of reading Ethan Wang's Walk Through the Suburbs, which somehow gets wiser every time I read it. Walk through the suburbs. A fingertip must brush perfectly into the ridges of the water. Lines and valleys slid with haste between stitched surface of the worn-by lake. Flesh boiled within steam, folding molds of a skin, a drawn warmth of plastic quarantine. In the open flung of the road, asphalt embroidered through the countryside, I lay my thoughts in successive alleys, bury them deep in the loose dirt with the dying barley and the petrol rye. Here leave the misconceptions, sullied yet still glistened pink, a flesh still bloodied portions. Next, discard these ambitions in a place slant unknown. Lower them softly into their granite wall home. Just one last request. Hold this dream for me. Twist the feeling to a deep bleed until it lives 1,000 splinters. I will return once it's been the final sunset. So do not fill the tomb quite yet.
This is Transubstantiation by McCully Browne. It's the middle of the night. I'm just a little loose on beer and blues and battered air and all the ways this nowhere looks like home. The fields and boarded houses dead with summer. The filling station rowdy with rumor of another place. Cattle pace the distance between road and gloaming, inexplicably awake. And then the bathtubs littered in the pasture. For sale or salvage or some secret labor stranger than I know. How does it work again? The alchemy that shapes them briefly into boats, and then the bones of great felled beasts, and once more into keening copper bells, before I even blink. Half a mile out, the city builds back up again along the margin. Country songs cut in and out of the static on the radio. Lord, most of what I love mistakes itself for nothing.
That was amazing. I'm Tracy Toms again, and I will be reading America Will Be by Joshua Bennett after Langston Hughes. I am now at the age where my father calls me brother when we say goodbye. Take care of yourself, brother, he whispers a half beat before we hang up the phone. And it is as if some great bridge has unfolded over the air between us. He is 68 years old. He was born in the throat of Jim Crow, Alabama, one of 10 children, their bodies side by side in the kitchen each morning like a pair of hands exulting. Over breakfast, I ask him to tell me the hardest thing about going to school back then, expecting some history I have already memorized: boycotts and attack dogs, fire hoses, Bull Connor in his personal tank, candy paint shining white as a slaver's ghost. He says, having to read the Canterbury Tales. He says, eating lunch alone. Now I hear the word America, and I think first of my father's loneliness. The hands holding the pens that stabbed him as he walked through the hallway, unclenching palms settling onto a wooden desk, taking notes, trying to pretend the shame didn't feel like an inheritance. You say democracy, and I see the men holding documents that sent him off to war a year later. Motown blaring from a country boy's bunker as napalm scarred the sky into jigsaw patterns. His eyes open wide as the blooming blue hearts of the light bulb in a Crown Heights basement where he and my mother will dance for the first time, their bodies swaying like rockets in the impossible dark. And yes, I know that this is more than likely not what you mean when you sing liberty, but it is the only kind I know or can readily claim. The times where those hunted by history are underground and somehow daring to love what they cannot hold or fully fathom when the stranger is not a threat, but the promise of a different ending. I woke up this morning and there were men on television lauding a wall big enough to box out an entire world, families torn with the stroke of a pen, citizenship, little more than some garment that can be stolen or reduced to cinder at a tyrant's whim. My father knows this grew up. Knowing this, witnessed firsthand the firebombs the clan multiple messiahs love-soaked and shot through, somehow still believes in this grand blood-stained experiment, still votes, still prays that his children might make a life unlike any he has ever seen. He looks at me like the promise of another cosmos, and I never know what to tell him. All of the books in my head have made me cynical and distant, but there's a choir in him that calls me forward, my disbelief built as it is from the bricks of his belief, not in any America you might see on network news or hear heralded before a football game, but in the quiet power of Sam Cooke, singing that he was born by a river that remains unnamed, that he runs alongside to this day. Some vast and future country, some nation within a nation, black as candor, loud as the sound of my father's unfettered laughter over cheese, eggs, and coffee. His eyes shut tight as armories, his fists unclenched as if he were invincible. Thank you so much, Joshua, for letting me read that poem. That poem is amazing.
Thank you, Tracy. You read that beautifully. I'm going to send this recording to my dad. He's going to be hyped. He's going to be bragging to my uncles about this for a long time. So thank you. And thank you everyone that read. This is fantastic. Y'all can turn your screens back on now. We're going to do our Q&A, if that's all right. Fantastic. Good to see all your faces again. Actually, can we have a quick round of applause for ourselves as a collective, as a group?
You guys are amazing. Oh my God. Oh my God.
Cousins, yeah, y'all did your thing. So I want to actually just continue in that spirit, okay? Before we get into, biographical details about you all, which we will shortly, I want to begin with praise, okay? So for all the poets who read tonight, I want to know if you could say a little bit about why you chose the poems you share and about what you found beautiful or strange, familiar or astonishing in them, okay? And I'll trust my fellow moderators to help me figure out whose hand is up, who I should call.
Oh, how does it? Oh, hand.
Sounds like Patricia wants to talk. So
Okay.
Why don't we just leave ourselves out?
I'll do it like that.
I'm looking at hand. Wow. Actually, what I liked about Bracken was Maddie's ability to kind of lift me up as a reader and put me down in a situation that had nothing to do. I didn't think I was sitting there reading a poem. I felt like I was experiencing another place, another time, a family, kind of a family story. And I love that it was persona. And she took me into not only just the normal daily rituals or something, but this kind of special moment. And I got kind of weirded out by the mannequin. I liked that it was kind of restless and disturbing. And I love to do personas that make me uncomfortable. And I got a feeling that there was some discomfort when she was writing that. And so I recognized a lot of what I appreciated in other people's writing. And I wanted to see more from her.
Yeah. Anyone else? All right, I'm gonna jump right in and talk about Anthony's poem. So I love a lot of different things about this. One, I love the phrase toothache lemonade, which is beautiful and evocative and has a kind of economy. And Anthony, I told you this on the phone, so I'm gonna just say it again if that's all right. It brought me to mind of Lucille Clifton, which I love. It also put me in the mind of John Denver and Take Me Home Country Roads, and the idea that somewhere in this country, there's a place in West Virginia where like God just lives over there, right? That beautiful line, by God, West Virginia. There's a deep love and concern for everyday people in it. And I'm always astonished when a poet can capture that. And just a small number of lines can bring us into this crisp window of people taking care of one another in a seemingly impossible situation, so.
Toothache lemonade is everything.
It's fantastic. It's fantastic.
So beautiful.
I got a couple more, but yeah, anyone else on this one?
I also was really amazed by how that poem felt like a folk song, maybe even older than John Denver, maybe going way, way back. And I was writing down all your best lines so that I can steal them throughout. So they're all kind of jumbled together, but the creek was polluted, the mines were abandoned. I belonged to the mountains, we went home. You could sing it, easy. It's awesome.
Oh, you got that guitar.
Yeah. Yeah.
Reading Isabella Ramirez's poem is quite a challenge. As you heard me stumbling through lines, it's quite a challenge. It's just such a long breath, and just so much to say about Mama. A lot of poems to our fathers and mothers, and I've been out there in abstract land, and so political land, and like we all have, and it's rare. It's a rare time. It's a rare moment when I come back home. Literally speaking, and talk about my mother. And I've done that very few times, maybe twice, maybe once. So I really appreciate this poem. And the question of Spanish and English, always dealing with that, right? We're always dealing with language or how we talk or accents or where do we come from. And in a way, it's what we all do, getting to know each other. Also, it's getting to deal with each other, getting to cross those lines and see what it's like on that other side of that cultural wall or language wall, or how to be human beings with each other. And so el cilantro, la salsa, the music, fighting back with with your own style and your own who you are and the battles, and the mother being a luchador, being a wrestler and a fighter, and in parentheses to top it off, and being spun blindfolded and finding your way. I enjoyed it because of this the dedication Isabella to her mother, and kind of talking about her life and her relationship and the changing scenes. And also loved all the voices, you know, everyone's voices, such beautiful voices. And hurrah, you know, for our mothers and fathers, and for Isabella's poem about Mama. Thank you so much.
Hey, Molly, I know you wanted to speak.
Yeah, I just wanted to say about Ethan's beautiful poem that one of the things I'm sort of most a sucker for in poems is when they're able to make the familiar into something strange and surprising. And I think especially in this moment when we might all be caught in the kind of small circulation of our own quarantine lives, to encounter the kind of the world of our neighborhoods, of our universes, and to encounter it made new and strange and something worth attending to feels so important. And it was something so extraordinary about his poem, and I was just so grateful to read it.
Maddie, I know you also had your hand up.
I did, yeah. I think both of these poems, 10-Year-Old Shot 3 Times, but She's Fine, and The President Flies Over, are incredible to read in this present moment. I mean, 10-Year-Old Shot 3 Times, but She's Fine, like focusing on one particular girl and humanizing her when we often don't get to see the victims of tragedy is astounding and incredible. Even the shape of the poem is so skillful. It goes right down the page in this big block, but all the dialogue is like cuddled off to the side together, more intimate. It's so gorgeous. And The President Flies Over, whew. Reading a poem about Bush's mishandling of another disaster, Hurricane Katrina, right now, it definitely hits a little harder. So thank you so much for the opportunity to read these both.
It was so amazing hearing those come from you. It just gave me another perspective on both the poems. I really loved it.
Thank you so much.
It's fantastic. So my next question's already been touched on a little bit, which is perfect. It makes me feel like I'm in the proper vibe, and that something's in the air we're all tapped into, right? So it seems to me that many of the poems we read tonight take up two themes, often at the same time. So one is craft, what a poem is, what poems make possible, and the other is kinship, right? Who are the people in our poems? What are they up to? So I was wondering if you could all say a bit more about the people that brought you to poetry, and the people that make the practice of poetry worthwhile for you. So whether that's teachers, play cousins, people that used to bully you on the playground, what brought you to the craft, and what makes the page worth coming back to time and time again?
Just briefly a tag team on what Joshua just asked. We have a group of poets on the screen, 11 more poets or 10 more poets who
that's for everybody. Yeah.
This for everybody, and whoever has the temerity to take it on.
Productions. Wow.
I can go. I think like the first time I wrote a poem was like literally after hearing a Taylor Swift song in first grade. So it's actually interesting also in like music and like all my favorite artists, like that's where I've drawn my inspiration, even though I'm not like musically talented in any way. Just seeing how like really talented songwriters like Taylor Swift, Lorde, Mitski have, it's like poetry, but with music, and I'm not musically talented, but I guess I just gave the poetry thing a try and here I am.
Way to go.
Go ahead.
I can answer. Oh, okay. So I'm not as impressive as Manasi. I started writing poetry in the 8th grade. And some of my early poems, they were okay, but it wasn't really until I started to read poetry that I actually became a better poet, and I actually figured out what I was trying to speak with in my writing. So I read a lot of Frank X. Walker, Crystal Good, Crystal Wilkinson, Paul Laurence Dunbar. I love a lot of like historical poets as well, Langston Hughes. But I think in terms of when I write poetry, it's not as much now that I've, I guess, like advanced that I'm looking at other authors. I'm looking at the people in my life who I want to write about. So, for instance, in We Went Home to Crystal, I'm writing not only about the place Crystal, but the overall sense of love and connection I feel to that place because of my ancestors and my family. And in a lot of my writing, I do write about my family, my friends, and the people in my life, the people who have shaped me both as a writer, but as a human, the people who have nurtured me, the people who have raised me up and taught me all that I know. I try to tell not only my story, but their stories in my writing.
That's right.
Darius.
Is that a question for everybody?
Yes.
I want to say something really briefly. It's like my dad came up during the Great Migration from Arkansas to Chicago. And he brought with him something I like to call the tradition of the back porch. You know, at the end of every day, he would sit there and he was telling me these stories about things that happened to him that day. Both he and my mother worked in a candy factory. And what that did to me, it was like a running soap opera. You know, he'd tell me about people he worked with and people in the neighborhood. And what it made the slate was clean every morning, and he would fill it with story. And it was teaching me whatever, a different way to look at the world besides what I was learning or not learning in school. So for me, it kind of began with those oral stories back and forth and how they could create other worlds. And I wanted to do that somehow. And so the natural path to lead to would be, you know, writing and making up my own stories.
Yeah.
Darius.
Yeah, I just, how I got into poetry, my mother was a poet and she died when I was little, before I really had a chance to remember her and have any kind of intimate relationship with her physically. And she had or actually in the physical realm, you know, and she had a book of poetry that was about being born to immigrant parents and longing for this place in Iran. And so I was really drawn to, I guess, her as poetry to me. Like she became poetry and the way I knew her was through this poem, you know, this book of poems. And it led me to kind of reading Rumi and all of these ecstatic poets and Sufi mystical poets who kind of shaped the way I thought about grief and joy and longing. And I was just thinking about, you know, when Joshua was talking about people, like the people that are in your poems and how people shape your poems. And I time and time again, I go back to family and longing in my poems, so.
I forgot one thing really quickly. I got introduced to poetry by getting up on stage and doing it. And someone asked me about influences before, and they're expecting you to name these big haughty poets. You know, I read this, I read that. I think most of my influences were the people who every Sunday night in Chicago at the Green Mill didn't want to be anywhere else. And these were people who bagged groceries, somebody who had just gotten out of jail, a teacher, an unwed mother, you know, everybody was there, and it was vitally important for them to be there and tell their stories to a room full of strangers. You know, so there was a lot of that energy, like a tunnel of energy back and forth. And I think I'm influenced by them and the memory of them much more than I am, you know, notable named poets, you know, because with these people, it's like, I don't know, this story has to come out. The story has to come out. And I appreciate them for helping shape me in the way, you know, when I take a perspective toward a poem, I'm thinking of them first.
Yeah.
Sale, I know you've had your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to talk about a couple of the points being made. And also I'm so honored to be in this room with all of you right now. Just seeing all of these ideas circling around and interconnecting with each other is so beautiful. And I think two of the points that connected for me to answer the question was Patricia's point about how the slate was clean every morning and it was always filled with story. And then Molly's point that making how you can make everyday things into new things. And I think that's how I started off with poetry. Was my grandmother had dementia when I was younger, and she was a matriarch in our family, and she was Navajo. And so what we would do is we would take care of her at our home, and we would sit by the fireplace. It was me and her, and I was very young, and she would tell me these stories that she could only really conjure up because of her dementia, and that even my mother hadn't heard growing up. And my intention with poetry was going into making these stories she was telling me into these new things to both preserve, because those stories were only oral, and to kind of transform into ways that transform into these things that could be passed on to my children or to my relatives and my friends. And I think that point of sharing and this familial feeling and love and intergenerational relatedness, everything kind of came in like a wave like that. And I think it's hearing that resonate with a lot of other people is really beautiful.
Mm.
Daniel, or Daniel. Oh, Bill, too. Daniel.
I don't want to talk over Bill, but yeah, just really quickly, for me, it was, I think, greatly linguistic because I spoke Russian as a first language. And so I think that just the contrast of the two languages was, kind of the way that they sounded different, the way that they naturally had certain flows. I think that kind of obsession is what guided me through all kinds of poetry, whether that was, silly poetry when I was really young, or now when I'm trying to write in more serious ways. It was kind of always that sense of language that drew me, and the way that sometimes a poem always kind of writes itself. I think that's what I was obsessed with.
Yeah.
Bill.
Yeah, I never thought about this before tonight, but the man who got me into reading poetry in front of people was a neighbor who was with the Central Intelligence Agency, and his cover was the discovery of poets, African poets. And I never thought about it before. I see this group of poets in front of me, and you see all the people of the world, all the nations of the world represented in this group. And I think this is why, just so I could hear all these other voices. It's been an incredibly rewarding evening for me. I can't thank you all enough.
Thanks, Bill. Hey, Joshua, I think we're at the moment where maybe we can bring in some of the people out in the world who are watching, but I know you had a framing question for them. We're going to reset the hands that have already raised. Sometimes those folks who raise their hands already have something to say, but we want them to hear what your question is first, and then we'll bring some folks who raise their hands onto the screen with this amazing chorus of poets.
Sure. And I have a question about playlists too, now that Taylor Swift has already been invoked. I had a question about music, but we'll rope it back in a little bit later. So I want to riff on a tried and true theater of war question and ask for the folks in the audience, what resonated with you in the poems tonight? What felt especially good or powerful or true?
Right now? You want us to talk about that right now?
Oh, that's for the audience, but
But Juan, while we're bringing people up from the audience, which we're doing right now, because people have raised their hand.
Oh, okay.
Why don't you riff on that question of what spoke to you tonight is true?
Well, everyone spoke to me tonight as true. I really enjoyed the new forces, the new human force, the new humanity, the new love for I don't know what it is. I think it has to be life, as it kind of channels through poetry, this thing we call poetry, and then the stories being told, or the moments that are being expressed right now. When Darius said that his mother was poetry, then I thought of my mother, being born as a migrant child and without brothers or sisters, just me and my father and mother, and trailers and trucks zooming through migrant valleys and crops and camps. It had to be my mother. My mother was that propelled me. She was that poetry, and Darius is right, because she had wanted to do all these things. way back in the early 20th century. She had wanted to be a dancer, a singer, a performer, a theater person, a vaudevillian. But in those years, as we all know, women were not allowed to even get out of the house. So she would always tell me that, and she would always do an impromptu performance or an impromptu song or a little shuffle on the floor or a poem she learned. And she only made it to third grade, so it had to be in those early years or in the orphanage she was at during the Mexican Revolution. So all that, in and out, all stories and poems and riddles and rhymes. Now that Darius said all this, I said, yeah, she was the poem, she was the poetry, and then propelled me in an unknown direction without my awareness, and which became what is it, that savage in our chest? I forgot that amazing line, that thing in the chest that rubs against the ribs. I'm just tearing it to pieces. That one of the poems, right? And so all that I had inside, but I just couldn't get it out. Not being allowed to speak in Spanish, and being from the outside looking in, from the other side of the track, all that. So when I made it to school, I just had this fire burning until middle school, until I had to explode and just get to it and jump into choir as a challenge to myself to get called on to sing the monstrous thing that I would never do because it was just so scary for me and difficult. But I had to do that, and eventually, then I just kept on going. But yes, my mother was poetry, and poetry launched me into poetry. I didn't know that, until this very moment. So I thank Darius and each one of you for being so sincere and real, and making me more real and more sincere with myself. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Juan. So Joshua, it looks like our first person from the world is Tiffany Blue. Tiffany, over to you.
Oh.
First of all, I just want to say that I really appreciate having the opportunity to speak. I didn't think that I was going to be bold enough to raise my hand, but two, I really, just like you guys are saying, this environment that you guys have afforded, virtually for everyone to share and to open up and to connect. I really, really appreciate it. I think the thing that got me into poetry was sort of a connection. I used to be really, really interested into like journals, like slave journals, old slave writings and everything, like at an early age. And in a lot of those journals, there's poems, and it was a way for, I guess, me being biracial and being taught that that was a really important thing really early. So I connected to that, and just learning about, slavery and Jim Crow at such an early age and connecting to that, and then reading, just the inside of what they were feeling, seeing all the differences, whether it was despair or happiness or hope or joy. And the way that I grew up, I didn't grow up with a lot of money, or we weren't really well off. So I connected to all of that. And it really allows me, the poetry just allows me to kind of get into that outside world, to explore my reality and to kind of understand what I'm going through, and let my mind, speak to itself, let my body connect to itself. Sometimes I write and then I read it later on, and I'm completely surprised by the tone or the choice of words, and things of that nature, because it doesn't sound like me, and I'm proud most of the time. And so, and hearing all of you guys and learning and experiencing this, I had a chance to connect on a really deep level, and I needed it a lot, and I really, really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Here we go.
Our next person from the world at large is Nyasha. Thank you so much, Tiffany. Nyasha, thank you for your patience. And I just want to restate Joshua's question before, because I think it's sort of the framing of all of this, which is not just what connected you with poetry, but what resonated with you tonight, what touched you, what was true, what spoke to you across all of these disparate and interconnected voices. Nyasha, over to you.
Hey, Brian, it's good to see you guys. I had to pipe up. I usually didn't. I suffered from the same anxiety that Tiffany did. But what really struck me this evening was how all the voices seemed to come from the perspective of a child. And there was a clarity to them, which I found incredibly profound and moving. I'd never really sort of noticed it before. Right now, I just feel very moved by that, because there's the recognition and the elevation of that voice and the importance of that voice suddenly struck me in a way that I have never really experienced it before. So I just wanted to say that and commend you for that, because it's a very powerful moment for me, hearing that and sort of experiencing that and realizing that for the first time.
Thank you so much, Nyasha. I should acknowledge that Nyasha is one of our actors who participates in a lot of our projects. And he's a dual citizen of the UK and the US. And if you want to see him, he'll be performing next week in Theater of War Frontline for Mount Sinai Hospital on November 19th. You're all invited. You'll be getting an invitation to see Nyasha speak. Thank you so much, Nyasha. Keiichi, you are next, if you don't mind unmuting and activating your video.
I guess just to speak towards what's I connected with. I really connected with Manasi's poem about, I guess, filling up space as a woman. And I also really connected to Anthony's poem about home and longing, because I'm Nigerian American, and I went home to Nigeria for the first time last summer, and I really find myself, I guess, longing for that place a lot and missing it, and stuff like that. And also, as everyone was sharing, like what kind of got them into poetry, and like finding their voices and what it is, it was insightful to hear all of that, because I only really got into writing poetry during the pandemic. So it was nice to hear how they found their collective voices and what it is, where they draw their inspiration from and such.
Thank you so much, Keiichi. It's wonderful to hear from your perspective and to connect with you. Rochelle.
Hi, it's Rachel. It happens all the time, though.
Thank you. I'm famous for butchering every name that comes onto the screen. It's just an exercise in my own ignorance. Thank you.
Yeah, it happens all the time. I just want to start off by saying you guys are like the coolest group of people. Like hearing all of your stories was just so amazing. Like all of you come from different backgrounds, but you're all such amazing writers. And I love how you mix in your background with your writing. Like I'm personally Haitian American, first gen. My mom immigrated over here when she was like 12-ish, but her parents came in the 80s. And so Isabella's poem really, really resonated with me, because I'm like, wow, seeing the juxtaposition of American culture and your parents' home culture and growing up in that space and having kind of like, you're having like a dual perspective. Like you see things through the American viewpoint, but you also are always tied to your homeland. And I really, really resonated with that. All of these pieces were amazing, by the way. I also especially loved the one that Joshua Bennett read for Anthony. Yeah, Anthony's piece was like, wow, because I love anything about, like I live in Florida and I just love anything about the South, like Southern poems, like hearing like, yeah, like I love that stuff. I've always been so fascinated by Black American culture, especially Black Southern American culture. So that was like really, really interesting to listen to. And I love the imagery that you used. It was just, all of you guys are just so gifted. Oh my gosh. Like y'all are inspiring me.
Thank you so much. Deanna, you're next. It's wonderful to have you back and to see you again.
Diana?
Diana, thank you.
No problem. I'm at work, so if something happens, I'll have to suddenly leave. But I wanted to answer what resonates with me. And that was, you know, when you read a poem, it means one thing to you. And when you hear a poet read their own work, it takes on like a different meaning. But then when you hear other poets read other poets' work, it just has so much more impact and it makes it so much more universal. So when you take these things, like maybe from another time and apply them to the pandemic and another voice and apply them to one of these diverse voices, it just makes it so universal. It's very cool.
Yeah.
Diana, I'm sorry, I don't like to put people on the spot, but since you've participated in other performances, would you mind saying what you do? Because I think it's relevant to what you just said.
I'm a paramedic and I got involved with the community building artworks, poetry workshop, poetic record as a result of participating as an, you know, one of the audience people in the Theater of War workshops. So Theater of War took me to community building artworks, which took me to writing poetry.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Diana. Essie.
Paramedic. Juan.
You're next, wherever you are.
Hello, everyone.
There you are.
Hi. Thank you so much. This was very educational, very informative, and I'm incredibly happy to be here. I really wanted to say something about Darius' poem, and I believe Mahogany read Manasi's poem. First of all, the poem Mahogany read was incredibly emotional for me. I'm not sure why, and I'm still thinking about why I responded in such an emotional way, but it really hit home for me, and I'm actually, I wish I have it in writing in front of me because I think there is something about that that I need to go back into and look into, but I really, really appreciate how strongly you spoke about being a woman and kind of filling your own space. And the reading was incredibly powerful. So I really appreciate that one. And it is going to be stuck with me for days. I can already tell. I am thinking of many things right now just about the poem and why I responded so emotionally to it. And so I just really wanted to thank you for that. And then the poem by Darius, I also lost my parents when I was really young, and I too have the same kind of non-physical realm response to my parents. When I think of them, there isn't much of an image, but there is some kind of an emotional connection that I can't really put to words. And so I thought the way you spoke was very powerful, and I just really appreciate it. So yeah, you guys are all very, very powerful, and I thought those are all absolutely wonderful. So thank you for sharing, and I'm very, very happy to be here.
Thank you so much, Essie.
Mm-hmm.
So wonderful to have you with us, and I really appreciate you sharing your story. Christian, you guys are next. It's lovely to see a young person on the screen as well, even younger.
It's actually my daughter Miranda here who wanted to share.
Wonderful. Miranda, welcome.
Yeah, hi. I don't have much, and everyone has all like beautiful stories and like inspirational ways that they got into poetry, but I just think it's inspiring that people so young can write poetry this like complex, and like you have to really look into it, but when you finally find what it actually means, you're like, wow, that really means a lot. And quite a few of these were sort of ones that I could kind of tell I would be thinking about for a while, and not just from like personal experience, but just because of the way that they were written. And everyone here is insanely talented, and I want to someday be like that. But there's like I can't pinpoint just one because I love them all, but you all have such different writing styles, but they're all like complex and unique and really beautiful to read. So that's all I had to share, I guess.
Thank you so much. You know, getting younger and younger in the discussion is always a good sign. And we're so grateful for what you brought to the conversation. I was really struck, and I, you know, was said earlier about how each poem that we heard in some way connected with the voice of a child. And how, in some sense, maybe that's the objective or the possibility of poetry, that we can connect with something in ourselves that we've lost, or that by virtue of the deadening, standardizing pressure of adult life, we've lost touch with in some way. And to have a young person corroborate that and connect with it is incredibly validating. April, we're going to go to you, and then for the poets who are left on screen, some of the amazing young poets that we brought up haven't got a chance to speak. We just have a couple of minutes, so maybe someone would like to have a last word, or a couple people would. But April, we're going to come to you as our sort of last audience member, and look forward to what you have to say.
Thank you so much. I always love the breadth of the Theater of War productions, and it's so wonderful to experience it in a new format. There was a, you know, poetry with a love of language. Poetry always brings out words and new phrases, and it's so wonderful to experience how people put language into a new form or a new expression. But there was a moment, you know, halfway or 3/4 of the way through the many poems where the words sort of fell away and began to just sort of glide past me, and I felt like almost like water or even butter kind of flowing into my ears. And I felt like I could ride that for a period of time until I became aware that that was happening. And that's one of the beautiful things about poetry, and I think particularly about this format of getting to experience it so much at one time and flowing from one person to another and one theme to another. They really just became all one and like music for a while, and it was really beautiful. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, April. Well, we're at the end of our time, but we're not going to close yet. We want to, we're going to close on time. We like to close on time, but we don't want to tie a bow on this too fast, and we can't, you know, put a punctuation mark on this discussion. But maybe there's a poet on the screen or a couple poets who had something burning within them to say that they haven't had the opportunity to say in relation to everything that's been said tonight. And out of deference to you and some of the ones who obviously haven't gotten a chance to speak, please just unmute yourself and jump right in.
Can we do this every week?
Yeah, I can agree on that. If I can meet up with you guys every week.
In fact, we can. In
Can
fact,
we make a playlist? Because my last question.
Oh, we never hit the playlist. We never hit that playlist question.
Okay, because part of what I was going to ask is for those of you, it's sort of a staple of conversations with poets that people ask, what poets have you read, what poets inspired you? I was wondering if people could talk about songs or films that they would give to a poet just starting out. And you don't have to talk about it, but if we could get that rolling in a chat or a Facebook post or something, that I would love that.
Yeah, Juan.
Yeah, I think I would go back to the late 50s and 60s. You know, as you know, it was a great revolution of film, whether it was in Japan or France or here in the United States or India. And I guess it comes down, for me, it comes down to the Andy Warhol nights of film, where you'd go to a theater and at midnight you'd get to see something by Andy Warhol or the underground film movement of the mid 60s, where we would go to the Academy Theater in San Diego, California. And it was at midnight, it had to be at midnight because it was underground, you know, underground. So you wear, you know, your rough navy blue crew neck sweater that would itch your body to pieces. And I think that's about all you needed. And then you walk into the Academy Theater at midnight. But there were films by Stan Brakhage, which I really liked a lot. You know, remember him who would drag his camera around and swirl it in the air and grow amoebas on the actual film strip and then shoot it. I really like that film. Of course, it was, you know, all mechanical, and it was the camera, and it was very physical and, you know, kinetic, and the film strip. All those have disappeared, mostly, if not all. And I like that time, you know, I like that time. And I like those 10-second films and those with scribbles on them, or 15, maybe a 1 minute or 2 minute film, which we're doing today also. But I really enjoyed it in that decade when we were being bombarded by Kundalini yoga and Jimi Hendrix, as you know, and existentialism, and who was teaching existentialism now? I forgot. All of a sudden, I forgot her name. Everybody knows her. Anyway, so that was a great moment when film was linked to student movements, and it was linked to the world, and it was linked to experimentalism, and it was linked to liberation, and it was international, and it was short, and it was physical, and it could be long too, like Warhol, you know, these 2-hour films. So that was a good moment for me as a university student, and also I think it was also a high school student, and university student. So I will recommend some of those films, whatever they are.
Thank you so much, Juan. So I'd be derelict if I didn't mention that Stan Brakhage won a Scholastic Award for a short story that he wrote in 1951 called 3 Deaths and the Child.
Yeah.
And,
I want to see that.
I say this because that's the Scholastic Writing Awards and the Alliance for Young Artists Writers is the reason we're all here together. In a culture that doesn't necessarily value creativity, in a culture that doesn't necessarily celebrate the potential of young people who are artistic or literary in their ambitions. This program has been around for almost 100 years. That everyone from Andy Warhol, Truman Capote, Richard Avedon, Sylvia Plath, Stan Brakhage, and so many others won these awards when they were young people. And like these national student poets we see before us now, Philip Pearlstein, Richard Avedon won for a poem that he'd written called Wanderlust. He'd just been kicked out of high school when he received the award. And he said that receiving the award was the most seminal moment of his young life because it gave him the courage to pursue a life that he loved.
Yes. Sylvia
Plath won for a painting. Robert Redford won for a painting. The list goes on and on. I'm going to briefly, because we're really out of time, we like to end on time. I'm going to go over quickly to Chasity in 1 second, but I want to acknowledge, we don't usually use the chat, but there's been so much activity amongst our poets. We have the entire Bjork discography on the playlist. Anything by Smokey Robinson, that's from Patricia Smith. My First Poet film, Daughters of the Dust, amazing film. Bambi by Jidenna. Connie Converse's I've Considered the Lilies is always my go-to poetry song. She was a pioneering folk woman singer in the 1950s. Maddie Dietz said that. Miles Hewitt said Bob Dylan and Smokey Robinson was America's greatest poets. Funeral and Better Than Yourself by Lucas Graham, that's Kechi, who joined us earlier and is with us. Anthony Wiles, listen to old country gospel and spirituals, focus on the poetics of the words themselves, but also the rhythm and the pausing of the performers. Patricia Smith says Mahalia Jackson. Tiffany Blue says, hello, stranger, Barbara Lou. I think actually that's not on the playlist, but regardless, it's great to read the chat. A connection being made. So many others that are being listed here. Black Dog by Arlo Parks, Miss Lauryn Hill. The list goes on and on. Sam Cooke, which was referenced earlier. Otis Redding, who cannot recognize Otis Redding. Boy, I could read this all night. But before we run out of time, Chasity, let's go over to you, and then Joshua, we'll come back to you for a final last word because I want to make sure we bookend this. Chasity.
Thank you, Brian, and thank you, everyone. I am so happy to be here tonight, and just backtracking a little bit to what I found moving, I found so much moving, from like the poetry readings to the discussion to the music recommendations. But there is a line in one of Joshua's poems, the one that Tracy read towards the end, about daring to love what one cannot hold. And I think that I've just been sort of turning that line over in my head. And to me, it sort of feels like an alternative definition for hope. And I think that like in this time where hope is something that we're thinking about so much, and like that so many of us are trying to have, I found that really, really beautiful. And I think that that'll just stick with me. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Chasity. It's so great to hear from you. I'm so glad you're with us. Boy, you know, the first time we scheduled one of these types of performances and discussions, we thought the discussion would last 45 minutes, but it actually lasted 3.5 hours and had to be cut off at midnight. We won't do that tonight because we're going to invite you to some other performances and experiences coming up. But Joshua, since you've been leading this experience, I'd love to kick it back over to you for any last words or thoughts.
All right. Well, first, just want to thank everyone for their time, their energy, their care. I have not slept a full night in a month. And I don't really do events like that anymore. And I'm so happy that I got the chance to do this. And I'm happy that I get to raise my son in a world with young writers like you all, with poets like you all who take the time to care about young people's writing, and with an audience that would gather in these numbers on a Thursday night to celebrate these voices. So thank you all for being who you are, and for making space for the world to be better.
Thanks, Joshua. You know, when we called Joshua, he said, I'm about to have a son. And I said, well, maybe you don't want to do this. And then he said, no, I want to do this because I want my son to grow up in a world where things like this exist. And I was really touched by that. I'm really grateful to Joshua for his contributions tonight. Look, if we had one message to deliver to you at the end of our exchange, and this is the benediction at the end of every Theater of War performance, Theater of War Productions event, it's simply this: if you relate to anything that's been said on the screen tonight, you are not alone in this virtual room. You're not alone across the country and the world. There are more than 30 countries with us here right now. Most critically, you're not alone across time. And that is the core public health and social justice message of the work that these poets do every day and every night. And to really reach out across culture and time and touch us in the way that they did is an incredible gift that you all have given us. And I just want to thank you all, the emerging poets of tomorrow and our distinguished poets and our incredible actors, and those who've joined us on the screen tonight from the world at large to be part of this conversation and this celebration and this expression of our core values as a community of putting poets and poetry out into the world in the face of this dark winter that we now face at this present moment. It's much needed, and we're going to need more of it in the days and weeks ahead. And so we hope you'll join us for more performances, more discussions, more experiences like this. And we'll talk about those in just a second. Before I do, one more time, if we were in a live setting, I have no doubt we would hear uproarious and deafening applause, first for our student poets, for our distinguished poets, for our actors, for our incredible alumni of the Student Poets Program, and for the people who've joined us on screen. But all you have is us, so we're just going to give all of our energy right now to all the people in gratitude who have joined us, and provide that deafening applause by our energy on the screen, which is possible, which is kind of amazing on Zoom. I also want to thank, just briefly, our partner, the Alliance for Young Artists and Writers, and the National Student Poets Program, which again is supported by the Institute of Museum and Library Services, the Andrew Mellon Foundation, the Wunderkinder Foundation, the Poetry Foundation, the American Academy of American Poets, and of course, Theater of War's longstanding supporter, the Stavros Niarchos Foundation. After an early performance of one of our projects, someone stood up and answered a question I often ask people about an ancient writer that we perform the works of, that's Sophocles. And I asked the question, why did he write this play or this poem? And someone stood up and answered the question, and it's become kind of our motto as a company. This person stood up and said, I think he wrote the poem or the play to comfort the afflicted and to afflict the comfortable. And I hope we did a little of both for everyone here tonight. comfort that we can come together across very disparate human experiences, comfort that we can all connect by way of this incredible technology that we've developed as humans of poetry. Afflicted that there's so much more work to be done to address the issues that were put forth in the poems we heard tonight, and the isolation that many of those who wrote them and who heard them and received them tonight are feeling right now. And it's with that sense of affliction that we leave you, with the hope that it leads to more conversation and more poetry and more connection. People talk about Zoom fatigue. I don't have fatigue for listening to you all. I could listen to you all night on Zoom. And could be so grateful for the technology, the gift we've been given that we can connect in this way. I want to just quickly say we are all invited to our next performance under Theater of War Productions umbrella, and that's November 19th. We're going to be performing Theater of War for frontline medical providers at Mount Sinai Hospital, which has opened it up to the general public. This gives us all the opportunity to go beyond facile expressions of hero worship and applause and really get down to the trenches with some of the frontline workers that you actually heard tonight join us in the discussion, who will be there at performances. And then on December 3rd, we invite you to Antigone and Ferguson, a project we developed with folks in Ferguson in relation to the death of Michael Browne, and it's an adaptation of Antigone and Ferguson with music, live music. We've hacked Zoom, performed by people in Ferguson and in St. Louis and in New York City. We ask you to continue the conversation with us and stay engaged by following Theater of War Productions at Theater of War, the American way, ER, Theater of War, Facebook and Insta and other social outlets. We ask you to follow the Alliance for Young Artists and Writers and the Scholastic Art and Writing Awards. The Alliance is at Art and Writing on Instagram, and on Facebook, they're at Scholastic Art and Writing Awards. We ask you to continue engaging with us. You're going to be hearing from us with invitations to our next performances and discussions, and we hope you'll end up on the screen like some of the people who are repeat audience members from tonight, and join this ever-widening chorus of people who are connecting through poetry and through a shared willingness to be vulnerable together. I especially want to thank Joshua Bennett for all of his contributions tonight and for leading us through sleep deprivation and helping us frame our conversation. It's an absolute honor to be with all of you tonight, one of the privileges of the last few months, and my gratitude is boundless. And I just want to thank all of you again. I know we'll talk again soon. I know we'll see you again soon. For those of you tuning in from all over the world, I hope you will check out the amazing work of all of these incredible poets on the screen. And that we'll see you at the next one. Thanks again, you all. It was an absolute pleasure.
So much. Have a good night.
Thank you, Brian.
Or good morning.
Wherever you are.
All right.
Thank you, Molly.
Thanks, Bill.
Thank you, Bill. It was such a pleasure. That was awesome.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Josh. Thank you. See you guys later.
Thank you, Mr. Herrera.
Good job, Brian. Good job.
Brian, Marjorie, we did it. Thank y'all. I'm off. It's my shift. I'm gonna go home, my boy. I'll see y'all soon.
Enjoy it. Thanks so much.